Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features X-Men and Alpha Flight number 2. It's number 2 of a 2-issue limited series. It's double-sized. There's 48 pages of story inside this issue, no advertisements. The cover is by Paul Smith and Bob Wiacek. It's a wraparound cover, but Paul Smith's design here really has an image for the front cover and a different one for the back. But he's working in some perspective and scale here, where you can see the tiny figure of Colossus there against the huge ogre. And in the ogre's fists, he's got North Star and Talisman over there, if you look carefully. And over here, he has got Aurora. So that's how huge that ogre is. But our main focus is on Loki with Madeline Pryor, and she's using the code name Anodyne because of the powers she's derived from this magical fire fountain here in the background. But this really is the setup coming for a knockdown fight between Loki and the combined teams of Alpha Flight and the X-Men. So let's open this one up to the splash page. And what's very interesting here is on the inside cover, you get a catch-up in terms of everything that happened in part 1 of the 2-issue miniseries. So that's very handy for any readers who missed that first issue. And then we're into the story. So the setting is Canada, very specifically northern Quebec, the shores of Ungava Bay overlooking Gyrfalcon Island. This is an interesting shot that Paul Smith has given us in the art, where we're looking down over the top of the citadel and out towards the snowy mountains surrounding it. The title of the story is The Gift, Part 2, and the creative team there, Chris Claremont writer, but it's from a premise or an idea by Jim Shooter, Ann Nocenti, and Denny O'Neil. Paul Smith pencils, Bob Wiacek, his name's spelt wrong there, and Friends inkers. So Wiacek is doing most of the inking, but there's a few other hands involved, which indicates that there was a bit of deadline pressure getting this one done and printed. Excuse me. And then we zoom in on Elizabeth Two Young Men. So she's the daughter of Shaman, and she has been sent by by Cyclops, I think, if I recall correctly, at the end of the previous issue, to go after Kitty Pryde, who herself was going after Rachel, who left in great distress after Madeline revealed to Scott that she was pregnant with an unborn son. So, Talisman here, that's her code name, is thinking to herself, hard to believe that yesterday this fantastic city didn't exist, yet it may well be a preview of what the entire world will soon look like. And then she's back to the business at hand. It feels to her like she's been wandering through the catacombs forever, and she's wondering how deep they go. Got to watch where I step. This radiant lichen, so that's under her feet there, casts enough light for me to see, but the stuff's slippery. Moments like this, I'd give anything for a pair of jeans and my hiking boots. My costume looks pretty keen, but it ain't the most practical of outfits. So that's always very interesting of Claremont, that in this era of his writing the X-Men and other characters at Marvel, very much treated them like real human beings, where they will have thoughts and comments on the wacky kind of conventions of superhero type costumes, and so he's given that to Talisman there, and it's nicely done. So let's continue with the story, and there's plenty of intrigue in the first half of this particular issue, where she stumbles upon this book in the rock, and she sees that it's a sketchbook. Name on the flyleaf is Paul Dominic. He was one of the Canadian explorers in the first issue that is now being transformed by the fire fountain into the architect engineer who has built the city that they are in at present. And she thinks to herself as she turns the pages of a sketchbook, which we saw in the first issue, his power created the city. These designs are spectacular. And then she's baffled, and this is really intriguing. The drawings get progressively worse. I wonder why. They can't be by the same person. This last has to be the work of someone's kid. So that's really intriguing. Why is it that the man's imagination and skill is so, what would I say, degraded towards the end of the sketchbook? Has it something to do with the fire fountain? Has it something to do with the dark side of the gifts that they've all been given? So then Kitty Pryde pops out of the cavern wall, and she gives Talisman a little fright there. And Talisman hits back with, it's real rude to scare a body like that. That's good stuff. Again, it's typical Claremont. So Kitty apologizes, and the two of them go down deeper into the catacombs. Remember, they're trying to find Rachel after she disappeared in distress at the end of the previous issue. And then this is really intriguing. They stumble upon a Viking village perfectly preserved. What a find, says Talisman. If it is authentic, oh boy, wait till I tell Dr. Munson. He'll go positively ape. He's my archaeology advisor back at the university. That's my major. A Norse settlement perfectly preserved. Wow, she says. And they find on the ground a rune stone. And Kitty asks Talisman, but she's already kind of given her a pet contracted name, Beth, here. That's another trope of Claremont's. Do you think the village was hidden deliberately? What's that? Is it important? Asks Kitty. And Talisman, she can't read the runes, but she says probably. Probably not. Still, it'd be nice to know a little more about the people who settled here. I'll try to translate it later. Now, Lockheed is there, and he's also part of the search team for Rachel, and he butts Kitty in the back of her boot there, and then she realizes that he must have found Rachel. And so this is a funny little moment here. I'm a dunce, she says, you have found Rachel. And he responds, yeah. Sorry I was so dense. And he just kind of expires like that. And the thing about Lockheed is it's always hinted that he is intelligent, but he just doesn't speak any English. And Professor X has been unable to mind probe Lockheed as well, but has that suspicion that he is an intelligent dragon. So Lockheed finds Rachel at what looks to be atop a mound of some description, with all of these stones in a circle around it. And Rachel is crying, and she's all upset because of the fact that she thinks she's never going to be born, because she was Scott Summers' firstborn child. And so she is all upset here. I mean, like, she is only supposed to be like 16 or something like that. So she's having a teenage meltdown. And Kitty decides that she'll go talk to her. Stay back, Beth, she says. Ray and I are teammates. Let me handle this. And Kitty says, Rachel, I know what you're going through. I know how you feel, but trust me, it isn't the end of the world. So Rachel insists that it is. It's the end of her world. She says here to Kitty, do you understand what that means? That unborn baby should be me, but if I'm not born here and now, I can't exist in the future. And of course, Kitty makes the practical point, except you do exist. And Rachel retorts, my past is a lie, Kitty. And Kitty replies, is that so bad? I've seen your world, Ray. I don't care for it. In your memories, I learned the limits of my life. I saw my loved ones slaughtered, says Kitty. But suppose your time shift to your past, to our present, changes the future for the better. Our story may have a happy ending. Isn't that worth the price? So Rachel is consoled by Kitty's argument, and she says, I guess, but it still hurts. Meanwhile, Talisman is thinking here, and again, this is excellent Claremont, where he is concerned for the characterization of a character that he doesn't otherwise or normally write. And Talisman is thinking here, Rachel wants more than anything, a family, a father she can't have, whereas I turn my back on mine. I've resented, even hated my dad for so long, blaming him for my mom's death. But I wonder, in trying so hard to hurt him, if I've simply hurt myself more, she thinks. So where do we go from here? What happens next? She asks aloud. And then something very interesting happens. The ceiling's cave starts to collapse. So they're in a tricky, sticky situation, and they're going to have to use their powers in order to get out of there. Kitty asks Rachel, can you sense where the fire fountain is? So she can, and she uses her telekinesis to blast a way through to the fire fountain. By the way, I should comment on the art. I always now comment on this particular trope where you get a borderless panel here. It's a device that any artist can use in order to make more interesting, visually interesting, the layout of a page. So Paul Smith does that there. And Kitty grabs Talisman and asks Rachel to keep them covered with her telekinesis until they're clear out the other side. So let's see. Rachel is there using her telekinesis to prevent the entire cavern ceiling collapsing down on her. And out they pop beside the fire fountain. And Kitty asks Talisman there, can she reach the ledge? So she does. And Lockheed is to keep Talisman company while Kitty goes back for Rachel. And she thinks here. So this is tricky. And I also like the way that Claremont would always do this, where he think in terms, procedural terms in relation to how characters use their powers and when it might be tricky for them. So Kitty's phasing through this collapsing cave, and she's thinking, I have to phase. That'll slow me down. Could be big trouble too. I have to become solid to take a breath, but I can't if there's no space for my body. So that's the challenge she has. And we get a nice, I like this panel here where Lockheed is looking down the side of the ledge, and obviously he's concerned about Kitty and Kitty coming back. So Kitty phases through this rubble here, finds Rachel. She can't hold out much longer against the hundreds and thousands of tons of rock that are collapsing. So Kitty tells her to take a deep breath, and just as she helps Rachel, or she phases Rachel using her power, these huge boulders collapse down on the ground, and they phase their way through the blocked cavern, and they arrive out unscathed. And Kitty airwalks them up to the ledge where Talisman is, and Lockheed is there delighted, licking her face in happiness at seeing her. So that's a really nicely told sequence by Paul Smith in the art. It's really, really good stuff from him, and nice characterization moments as well, such as Talisman here concerned about them. Where are they? It's taking too long. That's really good stuff. And also the inker using a screen tone here for the shadowing on the side of Talisman's face, but also the shadow cast by Kitty and Rachel from the fire fountain behind them. That's really nice detail and nicely done. So let's continue with the story. There's an interesting moment here, again, as the intrigue builds in relation to the fire fountain and whether it's a force for good or otherwise. So they're phasing. Kitty tells Rachel to use her telekinesis to carry Talisman up to safety. We haven't much room to spare and a long way to go. So up they're going. The fire somehow transforms humans into super beings, says Talisman. Goodness knows what it might do to us. But then Talisman brushes against the fire, or rather, it seems like it brushes against her. And something happens. The fire fountain, it vanished, thinks Kitty to herself. And then it comes back. The instant it touched Tally, again, that's Claremont with his nicknames, everything winked out. So they were knocked into the side of the wall, creating these kind of like forms around their bodies as they were knocked into the wall. But they're okay, and so there's a mystery now, and basically Talisman figures it out. Well, since I somehow affect magic, she says to the others, I guess this means the fountain's source is magical. Okay, now the readers know that. We know it has something to do with Loki, but now the characters know it too. For that split second we were in contact, says Talisman, I felt positively supercharged, which is probably why neither Rachel nor I were hurt by the backlash. I was somehow able to protect us both. So even though they crashed into the wall around the fire fountain, they were protected. And Kitty says, sorcery doesn't just happen. Spells have to be cast. Rachel says, so what are you driving at, Kitty? So Kitty's putting together a conjecture regarding the fire fountain and what happened earlier, the cave-in. She says, that cave-in wasn't an accident. which means that somebody was afraid we'd learned something we weren't supposed to. And if you remember in the previous issue where they were running off, where Kitty was running off after Rachel and Wolverine going after Snowbird, we saw somebody hiding in the shadows, one of the transformed Canadian exploratory group in the shadows watching them. So who that person was may have been involved in the cave-in. This citadel, says Kitty, the transformations these people up there have undergone has been presented as the best thing that's ever happened, the solution to war, prejudice, famine, disease, want, all humanity's ills. Maybe it is, she says, but suddenly I've got a whole lot of doubts. So Talisman gets up, Rachel too, and they're running after Kitty, but Talisman has forgotten the book, and it's left there in the foreground as they hurry away to the others. Cyclops is your teammate, says Talisman. The first person changed by the fountain was his wife. Do you think they're lying? Let's find out, says Kitty. Now you can see on this page that if you're watching this in high definition, or if you have an original copy of this comic yourself, there's some problems with the reproduction of the black line art. There's very fine line work here, and it is not reproducing well on all of the pages. You can see it most particularly in this bottom panel where the scene shifts to the feasting banqueting hall where the rest of the teams are enjoying a big meal, but you can see a lot of the detail of the black line work ink work is missing. It's missing on the figures here on Colossus, and here in the background I can't even see who this is here, and over here we've got Professor X and Northstar. Yeah, really sketchy. So the very fine ink lines have not reproduced here, and this was a problem with the cheapo printing technology that Marvel used in the mid 1980s, flexographic printing. This is what you get. So really what we would want is to see the original art for these pages in order to really see what work Paul Smith and Bob Wiacek put in that isn't showing up in the printing. So, oh yes, sorry, at the banquet here, there's concern for Shaman and Anodyne. That is, Madeline Pryor is wondering why she can't help him with his disease. He's dying, withering before our eyes. And Scott is there saying to her, maybe nature demands a balance. For all the joy you bring, the good you've done, a little sadness. Thanks to you, for the first time in my life, my optic blasts are under control and I'm to be a father. So he's trying to feel for a bump there, but she tells him it's too early for that. But this is a big theme of Claremont's writing, karmic balance, that there's a balance in nature, in the world, in the cosmos. And Scott is referring to that there. I just want to make sure everything's okay, he says to her. So they kiss, and then she slips. No, she doesn't slip away yet. But Jean Chrétien, one of the Canadian exploring team, arrives, and she's a little worse for the wear. She was a geologist, Madeline says. The fire fountain made her our rock shaper. And Scott says, interesting the way these new powers seem to relate to primal aspects of your lives and personalities. The poor woman looks out on her feet. Was that because she caused the cave-in earlier so that Rachel and Kitty and Talisman wouldn't return with the rune stone and reveal who's behind everything? It's interesting to speculate on that at this point. So Anodyne uses her power to heal Rock Shaper, and then she says to her, Madeline, there's something you must know. And Madeline says, I understand, you rest, I'll take care of things. So she's not confiding in Scott in terms of what she's up to. He asks, can I help? Yup, by staying put, she says, and minding the party, be back soon. So away she goes, and Kitty is there to see, she's looking for Professor X, and she's there to see Wolverine and Anodyne sitting beside her using her magical power, which always the signature of it is this healing fire. And Kitty stays back. She's coming. I better phase out of sight. Madeline's acting pretty sneaky, she thinks, as if she doesn't want anyone to see her. And then she phases in to the bedroom and thinks to herself about Wolverine. Wolverine's mutant power is a healing factor. He doesn't need her flames to fix him up, unless she was pulling some sort of fast one, mucking about with a part of him that his own talent can't. So she wakes Wolverine up, and it turns out that she did indeed do something to Wolverine. She burned the berserker madness out of my system. I'm sane now, I'm human, he says. And Kitty makes a reference to the Kitty Pryde miniseries, the recent one. Your mentor Ogun would have killed us both without that berserker fury. And Wolverine hits back with, you saying, girl, I can't hack it as a man, only as a psycho. And you can see in her body language there that that's put her in her place, that she's thought again about that point. And also the relative height there, like Wolverine's 5'3", Kitty there you can see is maybe even just an inch taller than him. And another one of those open border panels as well from Paul Smith. So actually a lot of panels on these pages, a lot of storytelling going on. I like the detail of the wood grain there on the timber column for the room as Madeline slips away. And now we get Kitty telling Wolverine all about what she, Rachel, and Talisman discovered. And she reveals her suspicions to Wolverine. And he says, regarding two of the Canadian crew, Beastmaster and Pathfinder, I can't spot their scents. The men aren't back. They haven't found Snowbird. And Madeline's stunt may give us an unexpected edge, he says. I was always more than a nutcase butcher, Kitty. Losing that part of myself doesn't make me any less dangerous. Whole and human as Madeline's made me, I'm immune to Boyo Wilson's influence. That's Beastmaster. Imagine his surprise when he discovers that. This is an interesting storytelling here, where we have the silhouetted side profile of Wolverine's face, and then this kind of DeLuca effect here, where he's speaking and then he pops his claws, and then we get this reverse angle on him as well. That's interesting design work there from Paul Smith. So Wolverine takes over and he says, you alert Xavier and have Aurora meet me at the main gate. We've got no time to waste and a lot of ground to cover. So Aurora flies him out. Lockheed flies along as well, tags along. And the trail for Snowbird ends where all the demons from Shaman's charm bag were cast and are fighting each other. Wolverine slides down the side of this snowdrift and he tells Aurora, stay in the background till I give a yell. If I run into trouble, bring the cavalry. So Wolverine sees the demons fighting each other and he thinks to himself, shouldn't have shot my mouth off to Kitty. My old self would have waded through this mess without a second thought. It's chaos, pure and primordial. All Shaman's critters are trying to tear themselves apart just like they did him in the previous issue. That happened when he entered the Citadel. Narya's scent, so he spies the cave up there. Narya's scent is strong. No way, I could have missed it. She took sick the moment the fire fountain appeared. She and Shaman are magic. The fountain's magic has to be a link. And I'll bet it ain't a nice one. So we see Snowbird here. She's crawled away into a corner of this cavern and or this cave. And she's looking really the worse for wear. She tells Logan to go away. I beg you, old friend. Now they go back to Uncanny X-Men 139 and 140 in particular, where they had a moment of understanding between each other when Snowbird transformed into a Wolverine in order to tackle Wendigo rather, and then Wolverine talked her down from that bestial aspect of herself so she could transform back into her normal self and not be consumed by the beast. So they have that old understanding and connection between each other. She thinks she's going to die. She wants to end her days alone like an animal. But Wolverine picks her up and says, "It ain't your time, darling." That's a really nice sequence in both the story and the art. And this is a great panel. This is like one of the best panels in the issue. So we get this very interesting upshot, 3/4 profile on Wolverine's face, and I like the use of the screen tone there for the shadow beneath his nose and across his mouth. That's really nicely done. And outside the cave, Beastmaster and Pathfinder have found where Narya is hiding out, and they've brought all these wild animals, wolves and bears, in order to kill her. But Wolverine emerges, and this is a really cool panel as well. He emerges from the cave and he says to the guys, he says, "You want the lady? You got to go through the dragon and me," he says. That's really cool. That's a nice sequence. And then we're back at the Citadel, and we have Rogue appearing. Now, she's been cured, quote unquote, by Anodyne, so now she can make physical contact with people without absorbing their psyches and powers. So we have this nice, again, borderless panel image of Rogue all dressed up, looking for a dance from Jean-Paul from North Star. And of course, in the previous issue, she absorbed his power and psyche, and so she knows all of his secrets and knows that despite his misanthropic persona, there is a desire to make connection with people deep down inside him. So she asks him for a dance, and she says, "It's only a waltz, for crying out loud. It isn't as if I was asking for marriage or a commitment or anything." Sasquatch says, "Good thing too, young lady, because even simple friendship is more than North Star is prepared to give." But Rogue knows otherwise, and so she thinks to herself, "As I absorbed his psyche for those few minutes when we met, I became North Star. None of you all understand him the way I do." But Jean-Paul has come forward anyway for the waltz, and Rogue gives him an out. She says, "Jean-Paul, you don't have to," and he says, "Yes, Rogue, I do." So there's an understanding building between these two, and then Rogue explains, and again, this is good characterization from Claremont. "This means a lot to me," she says. "I never went to high school, never had a prom. Everywhere I went, everything I did, my power forced me to cover up head to toe. But Madeline, Anodyne, healed that glitch in my mutant makeup," and she yells out there in joy that she's been set free. So in the background, we have the adults, the older characters, observing, and Professor X saying there's nothing to stop Puck from having a dance as well. But he makes the point that the sudden gain in height, he's lost his instincts for his balance. Funny, over the years I got used to the constant pain. That's gone too, caused by my condition. Now it's gone, but I don't feel quite right. How's that for irony, eh? So the gift is proving to have little dark sides to it, and like the kind of idea that you get nothing for nothing is emerging here in the subtext of the developing story. And Heather Hudson is worried about both Snowbird and Shaman and how ill they are. She says here to the professor, "I can't shake the feeling that something's missing. I possess powers and abilities beyond most people's wildest fantasies, yet in the process I wonder if I've lost something indescribably precious." So that's like human vulnerability, perhaps. And then we switch to Talisman, who's visiting Mr. Ross in his library. He loves books, so he's got a library with everything that's ever been written in it, the knowledge of the ages. But there's nothing in the library that he's found that can aid Talisman's father. And so Ross says his world is no more. Earth has become a place where a shaman can no longer survive, any more than the dinosaurs could the ice ages. "I'm sorry," he says. So what happens next is that Talisman, after having a little tear there about how magic took my father's spirit from me in childhood, I suppose it's only fitting it claims his body as well, she says. But she gives the rune stone to Mr. Ross, and he is able to read it. He says, usually the objects of such stones were Odin and Thor, but he says, but Talisman says, I know, but this one's different. So it's not dedicated to Odin or Thor. And Ross confirms, yes, it's much rarer, almost unheard of, the dedications to Loki. So this is a place of power for Loki, and that's why the fire fountain emerged there, is what a reader could infer at this point. And then the scene switches rather appropriately to Asgard. And this is something, I've made this point before, that Paul Smith does. He'll have a scene switch in the middle of a page rather than on a page turn. And I don't know quite what I make of that, whether I prefer on a page turn or whether this is a legitimate thing to do, to have that scene switch in the middle of a page. In any case, we're in Asgard, and we see Loki's lonely outpost where he lives by himself, and he exclaims an oath, "Fenris, crack their bones. I've given these fools the power to reshape their world. Why are they being so contrary about it?" So again, you can see here in the art, if you're looking at this in high definition or if you've got your own copy at home, that the fine lines of the steps leading up to his throne, where he's seated up there, have disappeared from the print. So they haven't reproduced in the flexographic printing. So he's watching everything through this scrying stone. He uses his power to destroy it. And he says here, "My curse on those who live above in shadow. At their bidding, to gain a prize beyond price, I humbled myself. I did a good deed. But that, they said, was not sufficient. I must yet prove myself worthy. But of what use are my efforts, my hopes and dreams, if those misbegotten mortals refuse the glory I offer them?" So this is all a reference back to things that were established in the first issue. And now it's nighttime, and we have Rogue and Northstar after their dance out on a balcony, looking out over the landscape and marveling. Rogue is marveling there at how it's midwinter and they're standing 500 miles below the Arctic Circle, but they can smell the wildflowers. On the other side of those peaks, a blizzard's blowing, Rogue says. That's a nice top-down angle there. Good stuff from Paul Smith. But these pages are not inked by Bob Wiacek. This is a different inker than Wiacek. Don't know who it is. Would love to know. But it's And Company in terms of the credits from page 1. So, Northstar here has been suspicious about the fire fountain and all of that business. He says here explicitly to Rogue, "I learned very young, Rogue, one does not ever get something for nothing. I want to know the price." And Rogue demurs and says, "Sure, it ain't just sour grapes that Aurora's happy and you're not. This once, Shuri," he says, "I wish it was that simple." And then something catches them by surprise. But I think there's something off in the storytelling here, because I think what catches them by surprise is Wolverine kicking in the door to the feasting chamber, the banqueting hall, just as they're clearing up after the food. And Wolverine says, as he kicks in the door, "You're talking dreams, cornucopia, about her ability to feed the world. It's past time you lot woke up and took a long, hard look at reality." And of course, Wolverine is the man to really talk about brass tacks and reality, because he's the man who lives in the moment and is a hard-nosed realist. So here he comes with Lockheed. He's carrying them over his shoulder. And he says to her, "The party's over, lady. Stay out of my head, Charlie," he says too. "You too, Ray. My thoughts right now ain't for decent folks. From the very start, people, we've been conned." As he throws down on the banqueting table the body of Boyd Wilson, Beastmaster. And obviously Wolverine has slashed at him there in the thigh. He's barely alive, so Anodyne uses her power to heal him. And where's Pathfinder? Wolverine simply says here as he takes a slug of wine, flying with the angels. So typically laconic Wolverine. And now we get a lot of panels on this page for the storytelling. Wolverine here cuts the ropes that are tied to a stretcher that he's been carrying behind him, and he says he deserved better, but then so do a lot of folks. Some of you have wondered about the price of those fantastic powers the Fire Fountain's been dishing out. Well, here it is, and you can see he's brought Snowbird, and you can see that she's really poorly in the image. She's sick and dying, and Wolverine continues his explanation. Narya is a creature of magic, he says. She took sick the moment the fountain came into being. Shaman's power derives from magic. It went crazy the moment we walked through the Citadel's front door. His daughter, Talisman, neutralizes magic. She disrupted the fountain with a touch. I figure its genesis, the energy it uses for its transformation, has to be magic. And at this point, Ross arrives, and he fills in because he's read the rune, not simply magic Wolverine, all the magic in the world I've known from the beginning. I read it in my library. The fountain will grow, spreading its influence across the globe. Everyone who lives will become like us, except people like Snowbird and Shaman. They're doomed. But Wolverine doesn't want to hear that. He says no. And now we're going to get division between teammates, and people are going to have their different perspective about this gift. So Rachel, coming from that dystopian future, asks, have you the right to prevent it, to Wolverine? Think of what you're doing, Wolverine. This is our chance to remake the world. Northstar, of course, not up for it. If we are willing, Mademoiselle, to sacrifice our friends. That's interesting coming from him, the misanthrope. And Rachel says, in my memory, Northstar, are the moments and manners of all your deaths. I'll do anything to prevent that. And this is really good dialogue from Wolverine. Your choice, girl, your privilege. You've no right to make it for anyone else. So Wolverine the libertarian, eh? And then Shaman pipes up. So he's dying too, but he's not as bad as Snowbird. I'm a doctor, my friend. My oath as shaman and physician demands I work for the benefit of my fellow man. Perhaps this is for the best. Perhaps mine and Narya's time has indeed come. So he's prepared to sacrifice himself for the greater good. And now Colossus pipes up. So Colossus, the native of a totalitarian country, the USSR, says, I'm a peasant, Tovarish. My family are farmers. Our land is good and we work hard, yet despite our best efforts, many in my country go hungry. And how many in the world are starving or sick or without a decent home? So Kitty asks him, what are you saying, Peter? That this is good? Yes, he says, we can end famine, disease, want, hatred, possibly even war. Is that so bad? Kitty replies, a rational transaction, huh? The needs of the many balanced against the lives of a few. And that's what I'm saying there. That is like a kind of like an ethical foundation of totalitarian societies. Exactly the needs of the many balanced against the lives of a few. Think about who those few are, Colossus, she says, and this is interesting. Doctor Strange, Nightcrawler's girlfriend, Amanda, and maybe Ororo and Illyana, because Claremont has been establishing that Storm has an ancestry of priestesses and sorceresses. So Storm has some magical abilities herself, and she could be affected by what would happen if the fire fountain spread through the world. And Kitty ends, and Lord knows how many more. I'm sorry, I won't accept this. A gift so tainted with innocent blood is one I want no part of. I stand with Wolverine, she says, and we'd rather expect that. So she's standing with Wolverine over her quasi-boyfriend, Colossus. Even though I think at this point they've broken up. Yes, they have, yeah. This guy here says, this is our Citadel, youngster. I think he's the architect. He's the architect engineer. This is our Citadel, youngster, and impart our gift. we'll decide what to do with it and live with the consequences. And this is a great panel here. So you can see him, he's like about 7 foot tall, because some of them have increased with size after going through the fire fountain, like Madeline. And Wolverine, he's 5'3". Well, he's not put off by the guy's height. He says, or die with them. So that's real entertaining, tough guy, macho stuff from Wolverine. So Colossus here tries to get in the middle of an impending fight. Professor Xavier, Guardian, you must stop this madness before it's too late. But the professor says there is but one way, Peter Nikolovich, stand aside. And this is intriguing because Peter, Colossus, you know, who is like the most pure-hearted of the X-Men, the most, what would we say, one of the greatest believers in the idealism of Professor X's dream, splits from him here. Forgive me, sir, but I will not. And this kind of foreshadows what would happen in Uncanny X-Men 300 and 4, where Colossus would decide to go with Magneto against Professor X. So there's always been that possibility there in Colossus's characterization, going back to Claremont's run. So Lobdell not pulling that out of nowhere, really, years later. And now we get the fight that's been promised, you know, like over the course of the series. If you're going to have the X-Men and Alpha Flight teaming up, well, they've got to fight too. It is Marvel superhero comics after all. So interesting panel here. Difficult to do, to have all the different figures with their particular body language as well, facing off against each other. It's nicely done. And yeah, so here we go. Rogue says, hey y'all, I like long odds, but this is ridiculous. And Cyclops is siding with Professor X and the other X-Men against his wife. For the X-Men, Rogue, he says, being the underdog is par for the course. And Kitty says, joke all you like, Cyclops, but how do we fight our friends? And she exclaims, Madeline's on the other side. Your wife's got your unborn son. And Cyclops simply says, let's hope, Shadowcat, this will prove as hard for them as for us. And again, this is interesting in terms of what Claremont would later do with Cyclops and Madeline in terms of how their marriage would work out. Again, it almost, you know, in retrospect, there's some seeding here for the fact that Cyclops is not so sentimental that he wouldn't side against his wife and their unborn son, while hoping that they give up, or they give up. So what happens here is he blasts the three strongest on the other side with his optic beam to take them out. Nightcrawler understands, the optic blast flattened our three strongest foes. Let's you and I, Talisman, sow some confusion among the rest, he says as he grabs her to teleport. And the professor says the fountain is the key. So Rachel here is on the other side. I promise, Professor, none of you will get anywhere near it. So she attacks Nightcrawler there. And the Master Builder uses his power to shape stone however he pleases with but a thought. So he seals the door so they can't get to the fire fountain. And now what happens is Colossus and the other two, Sasquatch and the other guy, are up again. And this is a pretty nice image, like anchor image on the page as well. And again, a borderless panel. So they're racing towards the X-Men in order to tackle them. And the professor thinking that even though he's the strongest telepath, he can't counter Rachel's telekinetic abilities. So again, these are the challenges for the various characters in terms of using their powers. Each side battles for the best, he thinks. The noblest of reasons, heaven help us all. So here we are, we're midway through the double-sized issue, and we've arrived at the point of a fight between the two teams and some defections from one side to the other, and all of it is turning on ethical, moral differences between the characters on the question of whether on the question of utilitarian ethics, whether the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and whether friends can be sacrificed for the benefit of humankind or not. So they've divided philosophically, and here we go. We're at the point of the fight. But I'm going to end the review at this point. This will be part 1 of my review of issue number 2. And because there's a lot in these double-sized comics, and I don't want the video going on too long. So I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary, part 1 of issue number 2 of X-Men and Alpha Flight. Let me know your thoughts on this crossover in the comment section to the video. And if you enjoyed my review, please like the video on YouTube and share it too. It really helps the channel. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.